With that, my good friend, Judd Garrett.
Well, Bob, I appreciate your humility, but you were one great player when you played for us. You were all Ivy League player and one of the best players on our team. So I appreciate you saying you're just an ordinary guy, but you're far from just ordinary, and I appreciate your kind words. I grew up in what I consider a football family. My dad was a professional football player. He was a head coach in college. He was an NFL coach. He also was a longtime scout in the NFL. So growing up, our life revolved around football. We must have moved, 8 or 9 times in my childhood, and it all had to do with my dad's job. He was a coach, and you had to go from one place to the next, chasing these coaching jobs. And as kids, we had to, go with them, obviously. And our life revolved around that. And some of my earliest memories are sitting around the television set with my brothers and my sisters and my mom, watching the New York Giants play, because my dad was the coach of the team. And we're sitting there on the edge of our seats. We're living and dying with every play because it was important to us. I mean, it was part of the livelihood. We didn't want to have to move again, if he got fired. So, I mean, it was real, if the Giants won, it was a great day. If the Giants lost, it was a sort of a miserable day. And, that's just the way it was. So, our life was football. And I loved it because I love sports, and football is my favorite sport. And, there wasn't anything I wanted more to do in my life at that point growing up, is I wanted to be an NFL football player. I wanted to be a professional football player. And I was willing to do the work. When I was in the 6th grade, we were just talking about it with Billy Hill, when I was in the 6th grade, my dad took me and my brothers out in our backyard, right in Monmouth Beach, New Jersey. We had about a 40-yard by 70-yard field in our backyard, and he took us out there, at that young age, and he put us through the paces. And this wasn't, I would say, it wasn't the Norman Rockwell father-son playing catch type of deal. It wasn't like that. These were legitimate, serious-minded practices. And I mean, I'm in the 6th grade, my brother's 7th and 8th grade. My dad brought an NFL intensity to those practices. And, Billy Hill was there, who Harry introduced. And, as the word spread, a lot of guys from around the Jersey Shore would show up, high school players, college players, and NFL players. And, when I was 13 years old, Sam Mills showed up. And, Sam Mills just got inducted into the Hall of Fame. And I would go against Sam Mills. He's 22 years old, going to the Cleveland Browns camp, and I'm 13 years old going against Sam Mills. And, that wasn't the fun. The funny part was the expectation was I was to beat him. And if I didn't beat him, my dad was right there telling me what I did wrong, wrong footwork, wrong angle, whatever it was. So that's what I got from him. I'm supposed to beat this guy. I didn't know any better. Sam Mills is a grown man. I'm a 13-year-old kid. And I'm thinking, I got to beat this guy. And if I don't, I'm down on myself. But that's what we did. And these weren't 45-minute practices either. They were 2.5, 3-hour practices every day in the summer from the time I was in the 6th grade till I was out of college. That's what we did. And it was a lot of hard work. But, no one put a gun to my head. No one forced me to go do that. I wanted to do it. There was something I wanted to do in life. I wanted to be a professional football player. And, what my dad taught me was, if you're going to get there, you got to do a lot of work. You got to do all that extra work. And, I felt like there was a lot of other kids, 13-year-old kids around the country who wanted to be professional football players, and I felt like I had to outwork them. And that's what I tried to do. My favorite player growing up was a man named Gale Sayers. I don't know if you guys know that name. He was a great running back for the Chicago Bears back in the 60s and the 70s. Just a great player. One day I saw a highlight film of his on television, and it literally was the greatest thing I've ever seen. You should YouTube him. You'll see some of the greatest runs you've ever seen. I mean, he did some unbelievable things on the playing field. And when I saw that, I knew I wanted to be a professional football player, but I said, I want to be Gale Sayers now. I want to be that guy. I want to be that good. I want to be able to make those runs that he was making. And, I wore the number 40 all through high school and all through college because of Gale Sayers, because I wanted to be him. When I was in the 8th grade, I read his book. He wrote a book, it's called I Am Third. And what I Am Third means is God is first, friends and family are second, and I am third. And, even at that young age of 13, when I had all these sort of, dreams and visions of NFL superstardom and all that, I kind of inherently believe that that's the right perspective to have in life. That's what you should do. And it made me like Gale Sayers even more after reading his book. And when I started playing in high school and having success, and you get your name in the paper or you win an award, I tried to maintain that right perspective. And then on to college, have more success, you get drafted in the NFL, played professional football for a few years. I had the good fortune to be on the Dallas Cowboys in '93 when we won the Super Bowl, and all the notoriety that comes with that and the trappings that come with that. I tried to maintain that good perspective, that I am third perspective. And even when I got married and started having kids, as I was in my playing career, I thought the best thing that I could do at that point was to create a Christ-centered family and a Christ-centered marriage. I thought that was the most important thing, and I tried to do that. And I thought I was doing it. And, it's amazing sometimes how you can sort of internally talk yourself into thinking you're doing something that you're not quite doing. And I think that's what a little bit I was doing. Because in my late 20s, as happens to a lot of players, a lot of these teams stopped wanting to sign me. They stopped wanting to even bring me in for a workout. And almost instantly, I went from being a professional football player to an ex-player. And looking back on it, I'm surprised how hard that transition was. It was not an easy transition for me. And, it was just, and what I realized is that I was getting my identity and I was getting my self-worth from being a football player. And when I lost that, it was really hard. And when I think back on the Gale Sayers, I am third, if I really had that right perspective, I would have been getting my self-worth from my relationship to God. I would have been getting my identity from being a husband and a father. But really, I was getting my identity from being a football player. And when I lost that, it was hard on me. And, I kind of got depressed. I was lost. I didn't know what my next step in life was. And, I tried my hand at a couple other things outside of football. I tried to get away from the game for a couple years, and nothing really seemed to, fulfill me. So I made the decision. I said, I'm going to get back into football, and we're going to try to be a football coach. So this is a little bit delusional I was. I said I'm going to write 135 letters I'm going to send one to each NFL team, each CFL team, and most of the major college football programs in America. It was a handwritten letters. It took me 3 days to write them. I thought that was sort of like a personal touch that would catch their attention, and I stuffed them in the envelope with my resume. I sealed the envelope, addressed them, sent them all out. And you know, if you want to have a humbling experience in your life, do that. Because you know, I sent them out, and you know, I remember I was at the post office. I sent them all out, and there was a lot of hope. There was a lot of, you know, it was positivity, and you know, I was almost a little bit cocky. I was like, yeah, in a couple of weeks, you know, I'll have about 3 or 4 interviews lined up, and you know, I'll be in this coaching thing in no time. And what happened was, about a week later, I got two letters back in the mail. One said Buffalo Bills on it, and the other one said University of Michigan. And I remember holding the letters, and I was like, do I want to live in Buffalo, or do I want to live in Ann Arbor? But I opened them up, and it was like, you know, thank you for your inquiries. We're sorry there are no jobs available. We'll keep your resume on file, you know. And both of them said it was a form letter basically saying thanks but no thanks. And then the next day, got 3 more letters. You know, they're all saying the same thing. And the day after that, 3 more or 4 more. And after about a week of getting these rejections, I kind of figured out what the deal was, that it wasn't really going to amount to anything. The problem was I sent out 135 of them. So a whole lot of these rejections were coming back. And for the next about 4 weeks, I was getting 3 or 4 letters a day, you know, all with, you know, an NFL logo on it or a major college logo on it. And I remember I'd hold these letters, and I'd be like, I know what's inside. I know inside it's saying, we don't want you. Like, but I felt compelled to open them because there might have been the one that said, you know, we want to bring in for an interview. But I went about 4 weeks, and it was just rejection after rejection after rejection, and sort of told me, you know, how difficult, you know, it is to get these jobs. And thankfully, after about 4 or 5 weeks, you know, those letters stopped coming back, and you know, we could kind of go back to sort of, you know, being lost and not knowing where I'm going. But they say it only takes one, and my one came about 8 weeks after I sent out those letters. I was sitting in my apartment in Cleveland, Ohio, and the phone rang, and I answered the phone, and on the other end it said, you know, this is Mike Ditka. And I kind of froze for a second because I'd never spoken to Mike Ditka in my life, and I didn't really recognize his voice, and part of me thought it might have been my brother Jim playing a joke on me. So I didn't know how to respond because I didn't want to go along with it being Mike Ditka and then fall for his ruse. But on the other hand, I didn't want to make some sort of sarcastic remark, and then it's actually Ditka. So, you know, I didn't really know how to handle it. So I kind of was a deer in the headlights a little bit, and Coach Ditka continued to talk, and then I realized it was him, and you know, we talked for a little bit, and basically he said, you know, they got this coaching job open on his staff in New Orleans, and it's an entry-level position, and he wanted me to get on the next flight down there to talk to him about it. So I hung up with him. I called Southwest Airlines. I was on the next flight down. He picked me up the next morning. We drove over to the facility. It was about a 15-minute drive. We talked about football, and he led me up to his office. When we got to the facility, he sat me down. He left the room, went to talk to the GM for about 2 or 3 minutes. He came back in. He looked me square in the eye, and he said, if you can start today, the job is yours. So obviously I took the job, and 10 minutes later, I'm in the New Orleans Saints offensive staff's meeting room. I got a notepad and a pen. You know, all the coaches are there, and we're going over how to block power versus the over front. And suddenly I was an NFL football coach. And by the end of the day, I had my own locker in the New Orleans Saints coach's locker room with my name on it. To the left of my locker was Danny Abramowitz's locker, a great receiver for the Saints back in the 70s with Archie Manning. To the right of mine was Dick Stanfield's locker, Hall of Fame offensive lineman for the Detroit Lions, back with Bobby Lane and all those guys. And it was me. And the Saints did an unbelievable job. Like, my locker was filled with all this gear. I mean, I had 5 pairs of shoes, shorts, shirts, sweats. Anything I needed was in there, and they all had my name on it, Coach Garrett. And I was an NFL coach. And I called my dad that night to tell him the news. He was very excited for me. He congratulated me, and he gave me some advice in a way that, you know, those who know him, he could only say. He said, do whatever they ask you to do. If they want you to clean the toilets, clean the toilets. And I did that. I mean, I didn't clean the toilets, but anything they asked me to do, I did. And at that moment, I made up in my mind that I was going to be the hardest working guy in the building. That's what I was going to do. I was surrounded by, you know, NFL pedigree. You know, Danny Abramowitz, Dick Stanfield, Mike Ditka was the head coach, Tom Moore, the great coordinator for Peyton Manning for all those years. He was on our staff. Tom Clemens, the great quarterback for Notre Dame. He was our quarterback coach. Jack Del Rio was on the staff. We had a guy named Walt Corey, who made the first tackle in the first Super Bowl for the Kansas City Chiefs. He was on our staff. So I was surrounded by this NFL pedigree, and I felt the only way that I could, you know, make a name for myself and establish myself was how I worked. I wasn't going to have more knowledge than them, so I had to outwork everybody. That was my mindset. You know, the interesting thing that a lot of people don't, you know, understand about, being an NFL coach or Division I college coach is the time commitment is extremely demanding. And that first year, we had training camp up in Wisconsin at University of Wisconsin La Crosse. It was a 6-week training camp. It's not like today, you know, where the rules, you have to reduce the amount of training camp you have. I mean, we flew up in the middle of July, and we were there all the way to the end of August. You know, and I got back from training camp right at the end of preseason, and we were already into game week schedule for the coaches. And game week for an NFL coach is, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I was leaving my house before 6 a.m., and I was getting home around midnight. That's what I was doing. And I would go from Sunday night until Friday evening, and the only time I saw my wife and my kids was they were asleep in their beds. And they never saw me. I was a ghost. I would be in and out, and they never knew that I was there. And I'd get 4 or 5 hours with them, on Friday evening, and then Saturday it started right back. You know, I was in the office at 7 a.m., and we'd have staff meetings, we'd have a special teams meeting, offensive, defensive meetings, team meetings, and then we'd have a walkthrough. And that was just on a Saturday before the game. And, for the away games, we would have that walkthrough. We'd shower up, drive right to the airport. We'd fly to the opposing city, stay over that night, play the game on Sunday, get back late Sunday night, and start the week all over again. And we'd even have Saturday night meetings. And same deal. We'd have, special teams, offensive, defensive meetings, and team meetings Saturday night before the game, home and away. And every place I've ever been as a coach was the same way. The head coach, would give an inspirational speech to the team Saturday night, and as he was breaking the meeting, he would say, okay, Mass is in this room, and chapel's in that room. And I usually went to Mass. Sometimes I'd go to chapel, but I was raised Catholic, so I went to Mass. And if we had a long-winded priest, the Mass would last 20 minutes. And most of the time, it would last 15 minutes. And as I look back on it now, I was given 90 to 100 hours to my job, to football. I was given, per week, I was given 4 to 5 hours a week to my family. And I was given 20 minutes to God. And when I think back on, the Gale Sayers, I am third, I had it completely flipped upside down. I was first, my job was first, my career was first, my family was second, and God was running a distant third. And it's not that, I turned my back on God or rejected God, because if anybody would have asked me during that time, do you believe in God? I would almost have been offended. I would have bowed up. I would have been like, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. No question about it. But I wasn't acting like that. I was giving God 20 minutes a week of my time. And, there's real life consequences. These decisions, at least for me, weren't necessarily conscious decisions. I didn't take out a legal pad and the pros and cons of setting my life up this way. They just sort of happened. You get a job in a competitive industry, it's hard to get these jobs. If you don't do well, you're going to get fired. And then they're asking you to put in all this time, and you kind of do it. And you go along with it. This is what I'm going to do. In the back of your mind, you say, well, my family will understand. God will understand. And they do. Your family does understand. But just because they understand doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't affect them. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have an impact on their lives, because it does. My intentions were all good. I thought I'm doing this to support my family and put my family in a good place, but the impact on the family was really hard, was really difficult. And like I said, there's real life consequences. And, the example is, April of 2006, I just got hired by the St. Louis Rams. It was a good job for me. I felt like I put myself in a position to really move my career forward. And I was making more money than I've ever made. And, I decided to build this house about 10 minutes away from the Rams facility in St. Charles, Missouri. And, one lunch break in April, I drove out there to the house because they just sort of poured the foundation. They were framing up the house. I wanted to take a look at it to see how everything was going. And when I got there, it looked great. I mean, the house was coming along beautifully. We're going to be in a real nice neighborhood, got a nice yard, and everything looked great. So I'm driving back to the facility, and it was one of those really nice, Midwestern spring days. It was about low 80s. It was warm, but there was a nice breeze. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. I was driving back. I had my windows down in my car, and I had to go over this bridge that went over the Missouri River to get back to the facility. And I remember as I was apexing the bridge, I looked out over the water, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful picture. The dark blue water of the river, the light blue sky. You got green grass on the banks of the river. The sun was up, and it was just a beautiful picture. I remember looking out over that water, and I said to myself, my life couldn't be any more perfect than it is right now. That's what I said. And I think God was looking down at me at that time when I said that, and he was like, really? You really think your life is perfect? By what criteria are you using to make that assessment? Is it the fact that you're in the NFL and your career is moving forward and you're making good money and you're building a house? Are those the criteria you're using? And it was. That's what I was looking at. That's what I was seeing. And my life was the furthest thing from perfect at that moment. And I just didn't see it because I had my eyes on the wrong thing. What I didn't know then, that I found out a short time later, was that my wife was struggling with pretty serious drug addiction. She, at some point along the way, and I don't know when, because I was sort of disconnected from what was going on in my house. At some point along the way, she started taking diet pills. She wanted to lose a little weight, and she got these diet pills prescribed to her. And the thing is that those are just, it's pure amphetamines, and that's a very addictive drug. And the addiction took hold, and I found out what was going on, shortly thereafter, and it was a battle, and it was a struggle, and it was really a hard deal, for us, for the family. And and interesting, I remember saying to her once, I was like, how can you be so selfish? You're so worried about, how the rest of the world looks at you, that you're putting your family and your kids in jeopardy. And, but the problem was I was doing the same thing. I had put my career and being part of the NFL and the notoriety that came with that over, doing what was best for my family. And, and sometimes I even think that if I wasn't doing what I was doing, maybe she wouldn't have fallen into doing what she was doing. And so 16 months after saying I think my life couldn't be any more perfect, I was standing at my wife's funeral, and I was questioning God. How can you do this to me? How can you do this to her? How can you do this to my kids? I was almost blaming him. And in reality, he didn't do anything. If I wanted to find someone to blame, I should have looked in a mirror. But that's what we do. We blame God, for, the suffering in the world. How can God cause all this suffering? But God doesn't cause any of the suffering in the world. We do. Human beings do. If we, I believe if we human beings acted the way we're supposed to act and treat each other the way we're supposed to treat each other, most of the suffering in the world would go away. But we tend to blame God for the suffering when it's really us who's causing it. And it's the same thing that I was doing. One of the issues is, I didn't necessarily learn from what happened to my wife. I didn't realize what was going on back then. So I continued with, down my path. I became a single dad of 4 kids, and my mindset was still kind of stuck in the world, and I said, I'm not going to allow what happened to my wife to derail my kids. My kids are still going to get everything they're supposed to get in life. They're still going to be great athletes. They're still going to be great students. They're still going to go to really good colleges. I'm not going to let this, impact them. And the problem is that, I don't mean to be glib or anything, but those things are meaningless. Those are the way the world views a successful life. And I sort of pushed my kids in that direction, and I should have learned that the problems that we had that led to what happened to my wife was the fact that, I had marginalized God in our lives. And at that point, I needed to bring God back into our family's life, and I didn't do it. And I kept pushing my kids for this worldly success. And again, it has impacts. And my son Calvin, was a great kid, and was a really good athlete in high school, and got recruited to play quarterback at Bucknell, and everything seemed great. And when he got off to college that first semester, a lot of the problems that he was dealing with. I mean, he was struggling a lot, with the loss of his mother, and it was never adequately addressed. And, and I feel like if I would have brought God back into the family and made it a Christ-centered family, maybe, he would have had a better direction in life. And, he ended up struggling with his own drug addiction. He turned to drugs because, the pain of losing his mother was too great. And again, it developed into a serious addiction. And, it was a real difficult thing. I mean, he battled it for a number of years. And, in the end, he succumbed to his addiction as well in 2019. And, there's not a day that goes by that I don't regret, all the emphasis that I put towards him and the other kids. You got to do well in sports, and you got to do well in school, and you got to achieve this. And I would have done a lot better, saying you got to develop a stronger relationship with God. You got to strengthen your faith. And maybe, things would have worked out differently for him. And all these choices, like I said, that a lot of times they're not necessarily conscious choices. You just sort of, you sort of make these choices and decisions, and they're very impactful, on people's lives. And, right now, as I've been dealing with the loss of two important people in my life, there's a lot of pain that goes along with it. And, they tell you, when you're dealing with emotional pain, that you need to lean into the pain. That's what they tell you, that the only way you can process the pain is actually experience the pain. And I think that's true to a certain extent. But you also have to lean into God. And that's what I've done. I've leaned into the pain, but I've also leaned into God. And when the pain becomes too much, I turn it all over to God, because I can't handle the pain by myself. I can't process the pain by myself. So I turn it all over to God. And these last 2.5, 3 years, I've turned pretty much everything over to God, because my understanding of the way things work, my understanding of the reasons why things happen is too limited. And I have to trust that God has a plan not only for my life, but more importantly has a plan for my soul. And I trust in his plan for me. And to me, I feel like, I'm only standing here today because I've done that. So I told you earlier that, when I was younger, I wanted to be Gale Sayers. I wanted to emulate him. I wanted to be the Kansas Comet. I wanted to be the guy that scored 6 touchdowns versus the 49ers, or made those dazzling runs versus the Lions. I wanted to be that guy. But in reality, I was never going to be that guy, because I didn't have that level of ability to be that guy. And looking back on it, instead of trying to emulate that guy, I should have tried to emulate the other Gale Sayers. The Gale Sayers that said, God first, family second, and I am third. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it. And it's been a great day, Harry.